Can Law Roach save Emanuel Ungaro? This is the $84 million question. The late fashion designer Emanuel Ungaro was considered to be the last of the grand couturiers. The designer was soft-spoken, but his clothes did all the talking for him. He was revered for his wild use of mixed prints and his elegantly draped evening gowns. His work was also enormously influential on a handful of young Italian brands such as Dolce & Gabbana and Moschino. Ungaro retired in 2005, and his brand has staggered along without him ever since, cycling through a long string of high-profile creative directors without much success or notoriety. But all of that seems poised to change, as Puck's Lauren Sherman reported in August that famed celebrity stylist Law Roach is currently courting investors to acquire the brand and restore it to its former glory. So in light of that news, I thought it would be interesting for us to take a look back at who Emanuel Ungaro was, the legacy he left behind, and why his brand has been floundering over the last 20-odd years since his departure. We'll also discuss what Law Roach's interest is in acquiring Ungaro, and whether or not he will actually be able to pull off a full-fledged revival of this seemingly cursed fashion brand. The Ungaro family fled Mussolini's Italy for Aix-en-Provence, France, where the designer was born in 1933. His father was a tailor, and it was said that Ungaro's first toy was a sewing machine. He grew up learning his father's trade, and at 23 moved to Paris, where he began working for Spanish couturier Cristobal Balenciaga, who taught him rigor and perfectionism. Ungaro then briefly worked for his fellow Balenciaga assistant, Pierre Courrèges, before founding his own couture house in 1965 with the help of Swiss artists Sonia Knapp and Elena Bruna Facio. At his debut show, Ungaro refused to present dresses, which was completely unheard of in the world of couture at the time. He told the press, "They are not my style. I am a man of this age, and I will design for women of this age." Ungaro's early work was in the same vein as Courrèges, and was considered part of the space-age fashion movement of the mid to late 60s. And given that Courrèges' brand was on hiatus at the time of Ungaro's launch, his label quickly amassed fans, including high-profile celebrity clients like Jacqueline Kennedy and Catherine Deneuve. Knapp designed the prints featured in many of his collections, and the footwear was provided by Roger Vivier. Ungaro was known for including shorts with his mini dresses to make the extra short hems easier to wear. In the 70s, he started to move beyond space-age minimalism and really came into his own, discovering the flowing silhouettes and pattern power clashing that would become his signature. According to the brand's website, Ungaro became synonymous with unquestioning femininity, purity of silhouette, flamboyant prints, and exquisite attention to detail and color. The 80s would mark the most influential period of Ungaro's career, as he effortlessly combined the era's aggressively shoulder-padded power suits with an Edwardian flair for the dramatic, in the form of oversized ruffles and mud-and-sleeve silhouettes. Ungaro's brand grew steadily over the decades, and by 1989, he was producing 2 haute couture collections a year, 2 women's ready-to-wear lines, 2 lower-price labels, and 2 menswear labels, in addition to the lines not designed by Ungaro personally, which included Emanuel by Emanuel Ungaro, Emanuel Petite, and Ungaro Woman, a plus-size line added in 1996. But the arrival of grunge in the 90s, with its thrift store, anti-glam aesthetic, threw a huge wrench into the Ungaro business empire. Seemingly overnight, the designer's vibrant jewel tones and poofy dresses, tailor-made for a character on Dynasty, were deemed utterly passé. As sales began to falter, in 1996, Ungaro decided to sell a majority stake of his business to Salvatore Ferragamo SPA, with the understanding that the Italian company would develop a lucrative handbag and shoe division to help bolster Ungaro's money-losing couture business. And it worked, sort of. Ungaro did manage to keep couture alive long past its natural expiration date. In 2000, he still had 200 couture customers worldwide, 60 of whom ordered every single season. In 1998, the designer convinced Giambattista Valli to leave his job as creative director at the Italian brand Krizia, and began slowly training him to take over the business. Ungaro credited Valli with completely reviving the house and named him as his chosen successor. The pair worked side by side until 2004, when reportedly, after disagreements with Ungaro's wife, Laura, the company's global communications director, Valli abruptly left the brand. In a tribute to Ungaro after his death in 2019, Valli told Vogue that his late mentor was one of the big masters of haute couture, with a very personal kind of universe. We worked in parallel a lot, he on the haute couture and me on the ready-to-wear. For 7 years, I learned a lot from him. He was not listening to critics, just his own dreams and obsessions. In 2005, Ungaro sold the company again to businessman Asim Abdullah for $84 million and retired from fashion for good. Abdullah is a Silicon Valley tech investor who according to Sherman, bought Ungaro on a whim after growing bored with the industry that made him rich during the dot-com boom of the 90s. He told the San Francisco Chronicle in 2007, "The fashion thing was not a planned event. And even though I knew very little of it, I knew with a brand like Ungaro, I could refurbish it, and that I'd be able to do other things as well. It gives me a platform to build upon. I'm very committed to this business, but I see it as a stepping stone to other things." After the acquisition, Abdullah quickly appointed a new CEO, Munir Mufaraj, who then proceeded to churn through a handful of creative directors in quick succession. Vincent Daré, the former head designer of Moschino, was the first to take over the brand, but was replaced by Peter Dundas after just 2 seasons. 2 seasons after that, Dundas, who went on to become the creative director of Emilio Pucci and Roberto Cavalli, was replaced by Esteban Cortázar. And Cortázar would also only last 3 seasons more. In 2009, dissatisfied with this cadre of fashion mega-talents, Mufaraj decided they needed to do something big to shock the brand back to life and back into public consciousness. Enter Lindsay Lohan. In the PR stunt to end all PR stunts, Mufaraj hired Lindsay as artistic director of Ungaro, along with Central St. Martin's graduate Estrella Arquez, who would head up the actual design team. And again, this is 2009, so we're talking about Lohan at what is perhaps the height of her bad girl behavior. I mean, just 2 years prior to this, she was in court for a drunk driving case, which of course resulted in those truly iconic photos of her in a bikini and an ankle monitor. Mufaraj identified early on what so many in the industry now know to be the case, which is that it's no longer enough just to design good clothes. The creative director needs to be a celebrity in their own right. Mufaraj said, "When I signed Esteban, it was clear he would have to work with a celebrity artistic advisor, and they would walk the runway together. But Esteban was actually fired because he refused to work with Paris Hilton and then Lizzie Jagger." Lohan's one and only Spring 2010 collection for the brand was an absolute flop. A resounding thud heard around the industry, and one that was also openly mocked. One reviewer actually described it as a quote-unquote disaster. In 2010, during Paris Fashion Week, Lohan announced that she was no longer working for or with Ungaro, and that she could not comment on the matter because of legal issues. Arquez presented the following collection alone without the aid of Lilo, but the reviews weren't much better. When Mufaraj quit a few weeks later, it was announced that the brand was once again looking for a buyer. Soon after, British designer Giles Deacon was named creative director, and in 2012, Italian company AFA took over the production and distribution of Ungaro products. The brand has been barely hanging on ever since. That same year, Fausto Puglisi was named creative director of the brand, announcing that the label would be making its big return to Paris Fashion Week. In 2015, the house made its first foray into wearable tech, with an accessory that can only be described as an adultery aid device, a ring that connects to your phone and vibrates discreetly when one exclusive contact calls. In 2017, Puglisi was replaced by Marco Colagrossi, the former women's wear designer at Giorgio Armani. And 2 years later, Ungaro died in Paris at the age of 86. Since 2021, the brand has been helmed by Kobe Halperin, a former creative director for Elie Tahari and Kenneth Cole, whose namesake line apparently performs well at stores like Saks Fifth Avenue. That brings us to today. While it's still a name that holds a lot of nostalgic importance, Ungaro is not a brand on any consumer's radar. It persists largely thanks to its fragrance deals, despite the fact that Abdullah is reportedly saddled with debt, according to Sherman. But all of that could change with reports that American stylist Law Roach and a group of financial backers are preparing to purchase the house. Over the last decade or so, Roach has become one of the most well-known stylists in the world, thanks to his work with celebrities such as Zendaya, Celine Dion, Ariana Grande, and Anya Taylor-Joy. 2 years ago, he announced that he was officially retiring from the business, citing burnout. But that declaration hasn't proven to actually mean much in practice, as Law has continued to work closely with many of his most beloved clients, in addition to now reportedly writing a book and taking on TV and hosting gigs as well. Now it sounds like Roach may be adding the title of brand proprietor to that already heavy workload. Apparently, Roach has long been obsessed with Ungaro and dreamed of restoring this once great couture house to its heyday. Sherman reports that it is unknown who is backing Roach, but he has worked with India's Ambani family in the past, who are the richest people in Asia, and has access to many of the 0.01% that run in their circles. It's also unclear what exactly his position would be at the brand, and whether he would hire a designer or take on that role himself. A line designed by Roach would certainly generate plenty of hype, and likely result in a sold-out debut collection for the brand. But hype alone is not enough for a brand to live on, as this season's creative director musical chairs demonstrated all too clearly. And even worse, you could wind up with a Jaden Smith as creative director of Christian Louboutin's situation, where it's not even a stunt casting because not only does nobody care, but everyone is actually downright confused as to why this is even happening in the first place. An Ungaro revival also raises the question of whether or not there's even a market for an old world couturier in our fast fashion world. And even if there is, what does success look like for a modern creative director? How is it measured? Is it all about the finances, or is there room for artistic triumphs as well? And who dictates what those are? The maestros, the masses, or the investors looking for a big return? When it comes to both Ungaro and the fashion industry at large, only time will tell. But having the built-in guarantee that Zendaya will wear your clothes on a major red carpet isn't a bad start. Thanks as always to my sponsor, Ruth Ann Harnish, for keeping this series on your screen, and I'll see you guys again real soon. Bye.